Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm very happy to be here. I will focus on, as I was asked to do, the issue of sectarianism and the relation between the Assad regime and sectarianism. I must say I will leave aside the question of secularism because I find it problematic to. Sectarianism and secularism are often considered as kind of opposite realities. Secular equals non-sectarian and vice versa. Sectarian equals non-secular. It's in fact problematic. You can be secular in the sense of promoting a secular worldview while at the same time acting in a deeply sectarian way, which is exactly what the Syrian regime has been doing, as I will explain in this presentation. We hear until today, quite astonishingly, in my view, claims that the Syrian regime is not sectarian. And proponents of this view, for instance, try to push the argument by contrasting the Syrian regime with an extreme example of sectarianism like the Islamic State, which is fairly crude, or perhaps the crudest form of sectarianism you can think about. The sectarianism of the Islamic State is explicitly and repeatedly articulated. They say, like, Shia must die. It's derived from a religious ideology. They say Shia must die because their religious beliefs are basically tantamount to apostasy. And the sectarianism of the Islamic State is genocidal in a very systematic way. They think that all Shia must die irrespective of their political views. If you stop here, as some people do, you have indeed a stark contrast between that kind of crude sectarianism and the Assad regime. The Assad regime doesn't say, at least not overtly, that Sunnis must die. It seems, and it is to a large extent indifferent to religious considerations. I mean, what really matters for the regime is politics. Is, do you oppose the regime or not? If you oppose it, you deserve to die. Otherwise, you can live. And yeah, which is why subservient or supportive Sunnis are not targeted by the regime. The regime is not genocidal in a systematic way here. I still think there is a genocidal logic to the Syrian regime, because opposition is not seen just as a mere individual attitude. It's been increasingly associated not in the discourse of the regime, but at least in the discourse of some supporters of the Syrian regime. Opposition has been associated with entire communities. And these communities are not defined in purely religious terms. They don't say the Sunnis. It's usually a kind of intersection between, sect, Sunni, and class. So the rural Sunnis, the underclass Sunnis. And there lies the opposition to the regime, and these communities deserve to be wiped out. Just an example, a conversation that was reported to me by someone whom I trust, and that person had a conversation in 2012, quite early on in the conflict, with an intelligence officer in Damascus. And this officer told my interlocutor, in this country we have 12 million useless people, and we are going to kick them out. Which, they still have some work to do, but they've already kicked out several millions of them. And recently, a regime supporter writing in the Western media alluded to some kind of collective responsibility of pro-opposition communities who were described as like blanket description as fundamentalist Sunni communities who have welcomed ISIS and Al-Qaeda, basically. So just to come back to the contrast between the sectarianism of an organization like ISIS and the Assad regime, I think this comparison is not very useful. Well, I don't teach you anything if I tell you that Hitler was a racist. He thought that all Jews should be killed because they belong to a biologically inferior race. But we also know that you don't need to believe in biological hierarchies of races and to have an exterminationist approach to be a racist. We know that there are many, racism is a broader and multifaceted issue. The same applies to ISIS and Assad. Both are sectarian, but they're sectarian in very different ways. I think one of the reasons, a persistent reason to make sense of the sectarianism of the Assad regime, including among the academic community, is that there is what I see as an excessive focus on the symbolic and discursive dimensions of sectarianism. By that I mean, the kind of identity politics carried out by political entrepreneurs who explicitly articulate a sense of distinct identity among a certain community. You are Sunnis, you're not Shia, you are Shia, you're not Sunnis, you're Kurds, you're not Arab, and so on. The problem is that the Syrian regime doesn't do exactly that. You will never hear Assad, promoting Alawite pride. And quite the contrary, generally in the discourse of the regime, these kind of identities are a taboo. They have been a taboo. It's something that supposedly does not even exist. It's all about national unity. You might find some lower level regime officials who speak in sectarian terms, especially when they think that cameras are not around. But the sectarianism of the Assad regime is essentially a matter of practices. It's not about discourse. It's, to put it simply, it's a systematic manipulation of social divides based on primordial identities, religious, ethnic, tribal, for purpose of survival. It's exactly what Karam has described earlier, this kind of colonial divide and rule. The best known dimension of this manipulation of social divides is, of course, the well-known stacking of the military and security hierarchy with fellow Alawites, which was never done in the name of the superiority of the Alawite religion. This was actually made by people who care very little about religion. It was done out of a quest of security in an unstable environment. By that I mean, this environment, I mean the kind of coup and counter-coup of the 1950s, 60s. It was all about coup-proofing. So you would recruit your cousins, the people from your village, your region, and so on, and because you think they're more loyal than the rest. And with the strongmen in the regime being Alawites, then you end up with a regime that's heavily populated by Alawite officers. But the outcome, the intention has nothing to do with religion. It's a very pragmatic kind of secular concern. But the outcome is that you have a regime structure that's profoundly biased in terms of, in sectarian terms. Some people would deny that by listing, some sometimes powerful Sunni officers in the military and security. But honestly, when it comes to, doing any serious quantitative measure of the religious or sectarian affiliations of high-ranking officers in Syria, Alawite domination is overwhelming. I don't know if Norway has a law on gender parity in parliament, but many countries will problematize it now when we have only a small minority of women in a parliament, because women are half of the population, so there's no reason why they should not make up half of a parliament. In Syria, the Alawites being probably like 10% of the population, and they're probably also the majority of the officer corps, at higher levels. And it might sound as a strange comparison, comparing parliaments in Europe and the intelligence service in Syria. It's not a strange comparison. The parliament is the source of powers in democracies, and the intelligence is the source of powers in the Syrian political structure. So once you have a bias in recruitment and favoritism based on sectarian affiliations, this induces structural discrimination at many levels. Considering the fact that, as I just said, the real power in Syria lies in the hands of the security apparatus. Just to give an example, smuggling for decades has been a very, it's illegal in Syria, but it's been a very widespread activity. It's very mainstream in a way. Many people make a living out of smuggling. But when we look at episodes of state crackdown on smuggling, we see that there are patterns, discrimination. Some networks might be more repressed, others left alone because they have better connections with the security apparatus. Since you have, when the composition of the security apparatus is biased in favor of, a certain sect, this also has an impact on the pattern of repression. A very different example, which I studied when I was doing my PhD on Sunni religious institutions in Syria. It might seem absurd, but the Faculty of Sharia in Damascus was established in the mid-50s. So it was in the state-run University of Damascus. It's a very official institution. It had to wait until 1988 to be able to deliver PhDs, despite repeated demands by the faculty. And the reason was that the intelligence was opposing this. Likewise, when some faculty, very senior faculty members asked, could we establish a league of alumni of the faculty? It was met with extremely fierce objection by security officials. It was basically seen as a case of high treason. It's a league of alumni, right? It's nothing extraordinary in other contexts. And really, the Faculty of Sharia in Damascus, it's not a hotbed of Islamic radicalism. It was a mix of conservative people with fairly quietist political views and actually fairly open-minded Islamic reformists. But that was, there was no way they could establish a league of alumni. So you have this sectarian pattern of exclusion, discrimination, and that induces also sectarian patterns of reaction and opposition, and in turn, sectarian patterns of repression. Of course, you have opponents among all sects. Opponents have been repressed among all sects in Syria throughout Syria's modern history. But, and listen till the end of what I'm saying before reacting. Since 2011, it's principally among Sunnis that we've seen the revolutionary project embraced by entire communities rather than by individuals. And this was partly in response to existing patterns of exclusion and discrimination. I say it's principally among Sunnis, not exclusively. It was a dominant pattern. It was not the whole picture. We've seen significant mobilization among the Kurds, among Ismailis in Salamiyeh, for instance. But the regime, of course, made sure to reinforce the sectarian pattern of it. I remember I gave a talk in November 2012, and I had made a count of the number of demonstrators killed in Kurdish areas. I don't remember the exact number, but it was around 10. Was it 6 months into the uprising? When in Arab Sunni regions, it was in the thousands. It was actually in the hundreds after a few weeks of demonstration. So there was a clear sectarian pattern, sectarian differentiation in the repression in order to, of course, spark stronger reactions, more violent reactions among Sunnis and widen the sectarian divide. Just to finish, you hear that some people who deny the sectarian nature of the Syrian regime would say, they have Sunnis among their high-ranking officers, they recruit Sunni tribes to fight alongside them in places like Aleppo and Hasakeh in the northeast. Which is true, but it's in no way something that runs counter to the claim that the Syrian regime is sectarian or deliberately manipulates primordial identities. In Aleppo, the Syrian regime has had a long alliance with local Sunni tribes, essentially in order to repress urbanites, which in the past were seen as the main source of trouble and opposition in the region. In Hasakeh, in the northeast, the regime has settled Arab Sunni tribes in order to dilute the demographic weight of Kurdish population, which is why until now, in the city of Hasakeh, auxiliary troops of the regime are essentially made up of Arab Sunni tribes that were settled there by the regime and have a kind of debt towards the regime. And this was done actually to repress the Kurds, not at all in the name of national unity, quite the contrary. I think it's time for me to stop, isn't it? Yeah.
It is actually. Thank you very much, Thomas. Instead of taking comments.